Thanks very much, Owen. Thanks to Mo's Books, and thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. I look forward to our discussion. In late March 2010, a photographer working for the Multimedios company in Monterrey, northern Mexico, got a call at 5:30 in the morning. His editor said that there had been a shootout. So he gets in his car, and he's driving out to the region of San Nicolás de los Garza, in the outskirts of Monterrey City. And his editor calls back to his cell phone and says, no, it's not a shootout, but it looks like a body's been dumped out in this field. Go ahead and go get the picture anyway. So Paco Cantu keeps on driving, gets out to the scene before any other reporters. When he gets out there, there's only a municipal police truck, a few municipal police chatting by their truck. The body's been taped off, but the army, the state police haven't arrived yet, and there are no other reporters. So Paco is able to get close and get to work. He approaches the body and starts taking photographs. After he's taken a few photographs, the body's wrapped up in a blanket. There's several theatrical styles of execution taking place in the context of the current drug war, which have their own names now in Spanish. This would be encobijado, which means emblanketed. There's also entapado, enlonado, encajuelado. All these terms referring to the theatrical style in which an execution is presented to the world. So this body, wrapped up in a blanket, bullet through the head, in a barren field in San Nicolás de los Garza. And Paco Cantu is taking photographs, and then he glances at his digital screen and recognizes something strange. He recognizes the color of the T-shirt. And he looks at it more closely on his digital camera, and he recognizes that it's this kind of brown shirt with a strange orange letter B on the chest. And he starts to freak out. He goes back to his car, opens up his laptop, checks out his photographs. The day before, Sunday, there had been a shootout on another region outside of Monterrey, and Paco Cantu had gone to cover the shootout. He got there after the events had taken place. The Mexican Navy, had already cordoned off the area and had several people who had been wounded or apprehended in a branch of the municipal police office, and then at one point led them out, the Navy custody, all the soldiers with their flak jackets and bulletproof vests and their face covered with military-style face masks, their Kevlar helmets and assault rifles, led these people out of the room. Well, at that moment, Paco Cantu was there, and he was taking photographs. He took a photograph of a man wearing a brown shirt with an orange letter B on it. And at that moment, he was in Navy custody. He was completely uninjured, and he was being led by several masked, uniformed Navy commandos into a helicopter. 15 hours later, he was found dead, his body wrapped up in a blanket with a bullet through the head, about 3 miles away from the naval base. In the drug war, in the current logic, if you're dead, you're dirty. You're killed not only in your life, but also in your name and in your history. The body is presented to the world as a mass of death, without a name, without a personhood, without humanity. That is one of the first acts of stripping away the possibility of knowledge as well as the humanity, as well as any ability to fight, understand, and also fight what's happening. In the logic of the drug war, you're dead, you're dirty. Felipe Calderón, the president of Mexico since December 2005, told CNN in an interview 90% of the executions that have taken place during his term correspond to the various criminal gangs fighting over territory. And under such pressure, due to the drug warring of the government, the police operations and the military operations against them, under such pressure that they are escalating their combat over control of trafficking routes and territory and fighting each other. And this is the logic of all of the death, the bodies that we see daily, the execution headlines. Calderón didn't cite any kind of figure or study to justify that number, but that number corresponds rather insidiously to another number that is backed up with documentation. And that is that the Mexican federal government investigates less than 5% of the murders that have taken place since the drug war, which actually corresponds rather neatly to the general rate of guaranteed impunity in Mexico for the act of murder. But in the case of the drug war, since 2006, more than 41,000 people have been executed. 95% of those 41,000, those murders are guaranteed impunity. By the very fact there's not even an investigation opened into the act of murder. So we see these two numbers coincide, unfortunately, rather neatly. The 90% that the president says with no supporting documentation corresponds to these drug war cartels battling each other, or drug cartels battling each other, and the 95% that corresponds to the fact of no investigation. So murder and impunity, these are the two central facts that set the coordinates for our trying to approach an understanding of what's happening. And first, what they tell you. They tell you that drugs are illegal, illegal drugs, those that are illegal because they are very harmful for your health, and they promote crime, they create criminals. Right? And so the government is waging a war on drugs. That's how desperately and ardently they want to protect you against these drugs, these substances that are so dangerous. And this war, at its highest pitch, leads to unfortunate acts of violence that are inevitable as these criminals fight each other, but can be eventually overcome with the ultimate victory of the government in their war on drugs. That is a very clean story. It fits into a nice package, and it entirely corresponds to fiction. There's no basis in the reality of 40 years of a drug war, that story, to what we've seen. In 40 years, we've seen explosion of a marketplace. There are more drugs available on the market at lower prices now than at almost any time in history. And we have seen in the United States, particularly, how drug laws have reconfigured, in the argument of Michelle Alexander in her book, The New Jim Crow, the legalized segregation of the Jim Crow era into drug war policies that criminalize largely people of color class, largely African Americans, and has created in the last 20 years, really since the Reagan administration, the largest per capita incarcerated population in the world, the vast majority of which is, or disproportionately African Americans on drug charges. That's the neat story. But the story they don't want people to say, I don't think, is that drugs are a major global industry. The United Nations estimates that between $350 and $500 billion a year are generated in cash in the global narcotics marketplace. It's a huge transnational industry. In fact, Forbes magazine has taken to including the man suspected to be Mexico's largest so-called capo or drug lord, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, in their list of billionaires. And in a rare moment of honesty of capitalism, the first year that they listed El Chapo in their list of billionaires, typically in the list they'll have the name, say number one in the list that year, Carlos Slim, and then it'll say industry, like how this individual generated their fortune. Usually they don't say theft, but what they will say is, for example, Carlos Slim, industry, telecommunications. And in the case of El Chapo Guzman, said Joaquin, quotes El Chapo Guzman, industry, shipping, which I thought was a very rare and brilliant moment of honesty in Forbes' reporting on the true nature of the economic activity of the individual they're including in their list of billionaires. So drugs have become a major global industry. Illegality, I think, structures an interesting way perhaps to think about illegality as the principal feature structuring that global marketplace. And it does so in perhaps two principal ways, maybe three. Number one, illegality increases the value of the commodity, becomes a part of the commodity form. Because the risk is so high, it justifies these incredible price markups. There's estimated somewhere around a 3,000% price markup between the coca leaf that is sold by the producer in the Andes to the cut cocaine that is finally sold to powder cocaine sold to an end user in the United States. But illegality also structures the marketplace in another way. If we think about the example of books, one of, I think, the principal structuring features of the publishing industry is physical weight, bulk. One of the largest expenses of publishing houses is shipping, right? Like physically moving their product all around the country and around the world.